A viewer asks, why do many national religious Jews seem to be searching for an identity?
I think there are 2 points here to mention. The first is that I believe that there are many Jews who do not really feel comfortable, or shall we say they're not really convinced that they are what they are being told that they are. In other words, they're told they have to be or identify as a certain kind of Jew, shall we say an Ashkenazi Jew, or a Jew of Polish extraction, or Hungarian extraction, or Russian extraction, or Moroccan or Tunisian extraction, but they don't really feel terribly Polish or Russian or Tunisian. And that causes a certain disquietude in the soul of the person, of the Jew. In other words, the Jew is being told, you are from such and such stock, your father, or perhaps both your parents, are from such a background, and therefore this is how you must view yourself. But in truth, many Jews, and I believe with good reason, do not identify in that way, because they know very well that they have no real connection to Poland or to Tunisia or to Morocco or to Russia. And this is one source of a lack of inner security, a lack of clear direction in one's life. There is a second issue as well, I believe, and that has to do with a lack of certitude as to whether that which they are doing, that which many Jews in the national religious Dati Leumi world are doing, they feel unsure as to whether what they do is in fact soundly based on something, whether it's authentic. I believe I saw a good example of this just this past Rosh Hashanah. I was praying in a minyan this year. For the first time in many years I was not doing my own minyan, and I was in an Ashkenazi minyan. And both the first day and the second day I noticed something very, I believe, very interesting, very telling. The Shliach Tzibur, the Hazan for Musaf on the first day, was someone that I didn't know at that moment in time when he began to daven, but I later met him and know about his background. And I can therefore state that this person is definitely a Dati Leumi Israeli Jew, brought up in a national religious home, not in a Haredi home at all, not from any kind of Haredi background. And yet, and he davened very nicely, but one has to, one could not help noticing, I certainly couldn't help noticing, that several times, at least a dozen times all told throughout the tefillah, although he was pronouncing the tefillah in standard Israeli pronunciation, which, as I have pointed out on many occasions, is really the worst of all possible worlds. That is to say, it is neither an authentic Sfaradi pronunciation, nor is it an authentic Ashkenazi pronunciation, certainly not an authentic Temani pronunciation. The vowels are pronounced by and large like the Sfaradim, who do not distinguish correctly between the different vowels, such as the Pathach and the Qames, or the Serol and the Sere. The consonants are being pronounced very often like the Sfaradim, but only some of those consonants, not all. So that and some of the consonants are not being pronounced correctly, such as the Ayn and the Het, which is of course an Ashkenazi influence. So he was pronouncing the tefillah in standard Israeli pronunciation, so-called, but not infrequently he would go into Ashkenazi mode, That is to say, I noticed that he all of a sudden said in Una Tane Tokef, he said, instead of mi bekitzo or mi lo bekitzo, which is how he's pronouncing everything else, he said all of a sudden mi bekitzo or mi lo bekitzo, in a classic Ashkenazi pronunciation. I also noticed that in Uvichen ten pachtecha he said, instead of al kol haaretz, which is how he was pronouncing everything else, he all of a sudden came up with al kol haaretz, which is again Ashkenazi pronunciation. And this set me thinking, why is this person doing so? And as I said, I later learned more about this person's background. I met him, I spoke to him, and I know that this is not a case of someone brought up in the Haredi world who grew up with that pronunciation and then made a conscious decision to change that pronunciation which he had received as a child, and therefore occasionally, inadvertently, such pronunciations would slip out. This is not such a case. This person was brought up in an entirely Dati Lomi background and milieu. This was not the case. This was either a conscious, deliberate choice, or which is more or less the same thing, in fact, an unconscious or subconscious but deliberate choice. What exactly is going on here? I asked myself, and to me the answer was very clear. Here we have a Jew who was very much involved and moved by what he was saying as the Shliach Tzibur. He understood the Tefillah very well, obviously, and he was trying to lead the minyan in the best possible way. He was giving it his all, and he was praying with great kavanah, with very real focus and intent. And precisely for that reason, because he was trying to be as real, as sincere, and as authentic as he could be, he slipped into these Ashkenazi pronunciations. When I say slip, again, it's not because it's a slip of the tongue. He moved into that mode because either his conscious mind or his unconscious mind connects that kind of pronunciation, identifies that kind of pronunciation as more authentic, as more real somehow than everything else that he was saying. In other words, 97% of what he was saying he was pronouncing in his standard Israeli pronunciation, and 3% or 4% he was pronouncing in this Ashkenazi fashion. And it was very clear to me that this was precisely because he was trying to be as real and as intense and to daven with the most kavanah that he could muster. Precisely for this reason, he somehow slipped into that mode of pronunciation. It was a quest for authenticity. This was my impression on the first day. On the second day, the Shliach Tzibur for Shaharith, in the same minyan but a different person, prayed from as Shliach Tzibur, and he in fact only reinforced this insight of mine. This person, first of all, had the practice, had the minhag of pronouncing every Shem Hashem. Every time he mentions Hashem's name, he would pronounce it in the Ashkenazi fashion. So he would say Baruch Atah, and when it came to Shem Hashem, he would say Adoi, etc. You get the picture. And there are people who do this as a matter of course every day of the year. Very often these people come from families with some kind of Haredi or semi-Haredi background. It is reported in the name of the Chazon Ish Zatzal that he told people of Ashkenazi background who were already pronouncing things in so-called modern Israeli pronunciation that at least Shem Hashem they should pronounce in the Ashkenazi fashion. And I know quite a few such people, and I've heard many such people over the years. So this person, first of all, was pronouncing all the Shem Hashems in that fashion. But on top of that, and even more than the gentleman on the first day, this individual pronounced many words and many phrases in Ashkenazi fashion. In other words, the general pronunciation he was employing was the so-called modern Israeli pronunciation. But he would definitely use, on occasion, I would say perhaps 10 to 15% of the time even, he would use standard classic Ashkenazi pronunciation. And this, of course, simply forced me to reach the same conclusion. Again, this was not a person who grew up with this pronunciation or who found this pronunciation to come more naturally or more easily to him. That was not the case. That was quite obvious. But yet, it wasn't very hard for him either. But it was obvious that it was a certain affectation, and which it seems to me very clearly springs from a desire, a yearning for authenticity, for sincerity, for truth. Unfortunately, these two individuals, both very fine people who davened very nicely and gave it their all without any question, these two people suffer from the same problem, and that is that their yearning for authenticity and truth and kavanah in davening is misplaced. In other words, the yearning is very positive. That's how it should be. We should all be yearning for sincerity and truth and real intent and kavanat halev in our tefillot all year round, and v'dai, without any question, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and other important days of the year. But this usage of Ashkenazi pronunciation, which is not their normal standard daily pronunciation, is an indication of two things to my mind. First of all, that they somehow recognize, whether it's conscious or unconscious, again, is hard to know, but they somehow recognize, I believe, that the usual pronunciation, Israeli pronunciation, is not really the real McCoy, and it really, without a doubt, is not. There's no question about that. And it's amazing, I think, to what extent many people sense this, intuit this, without actually having studied the subject at all. But I think many people realize that it simply doesn't make sense, because on a very basic level people understand that it can't be that the patah and the chames are to be pronounced in the same way, or that an aleph and an ayin are to be pronounced in the same way. And yet this is what they do. At some point people understand this, at some level. Again, conscious or unconscious, but the realization is apparently there. And because they feel that perhaps this is not the real McCoy, they opt for something which they've heard, which is not entirely unknown to them. It's not their normal practice, but in this yearning, in this search, in this quest for sincerity and truth and authenticity, they revert to this Ashkenazi pronunciation, which was the pronunciation perhaps of their forefathers some generations ago, perhaps 2 or 3 generations ago, but not the pronunciation with which they grew up. And to my mind, this is unfortunate. But more than unfortunate, it is very telling. It is a clear indication, I believe, that the Dati Leumi world is quite unsure of itself. And unfortunately, it has to be said with justification. It is unsure of itself because it knows that it's not Haredi, and it doesn't really want to be Haredi, but it does want to be real, it does want to be authentic, but it doesn't actually know how to go about doing that. Why? Because no one actually has ever told them or shown them the way. There is a way, and it's really quite straightforward. Or certainly it could be something that would be adopted, could be taught, shall we say, to young children, and in one generation the situation could be completely changed for the better, because young children pick up such things very, very quickly, if older people sometimes do not. The search for authenticity is wonderful. The choice of using Ashkenazi pronunciation with all the extra ois and the yods and other mispronunciations which have nothing at all to do with authentic Hebrew pronunciation is unfortunate, and it demonstrates that the Dati Leumi world is in need of a much clearer understanding of itself, who it is, where it wants to go, what are its goals and its aspirations in Jewish terms, in Torah terms, for now and particularly for the future. And therefore there is, I believe, much food for thought for all of us when we are witness to such psychological, one could say, very, very likely unconscious phenomena.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.